Okay, hello. Welcome back to the Two and a Half Asians podcast. I'm your host, Raphael, or Matthew. Today we have a special guest. Can we tell his name?
Yes.
Mr. Evans. We will be discussing universal basic income. And yes. So would you like to start off on describing it?
I think I would like to start off by asking, how did you come up with the name of your podcast? I mean, I think that would be the first question that should be asked.
I think Alistair decided the name because our good friend Alistair here, he really likes to talk about race often.
Yeah. As you know, Matthew's not the authentic Asian.
I am.
You see nowadays.
Yeah, I'm a bit of hybrid. Yeah, that's why half.
Okay. And why Matthew? Why are we refusing to use...
Because the first week I arrived in the school, Alex called me. He thought I was called Matthew at some point. So
It looks like one.
the name stuck. Yeah, I look like a Matthew. Yeah. So yes.
All right, fair enough. All right, very good.
Yes, very fair, very fair.
Actually, he gets mad when we don't call him Matthew.
Yeah.
Right.
But only these two
Right.
partners, right?
All right, yeah. So, Mr. Evans,
Yes.
what are your views on universal?
You ask what is a universal basic income for those who don't know.
All right. For those who don't know, Mr. Evans, could you explain what universal basic income is?
Sure. So, universal basic income is essentially what the name suggests. It's a social support system where all sort of adult members of society are in receipt of a payment from the government that is supposed to, support their basic living expenses. There's no one single model, for that, and certainly even the idea of universality, I can't speak today, is sort of open for debate as well in terms of what that actually means. So yeah, it's a pretty simple concept really, but it's one that is very much sort of under debate and under discussion around the world. Yeah.
What do you think are some ups and downs of this policy?
Oh, I think the downs are probably easier to speak of in terms of issues attached to opportunity cost of government funds, in terms of sort of leakage at the top end of town, so paying money to those who don't actually need it, and again the costs that are attached to that. Whether or not it's actually going to have benefits over and above the existing social support mechanisms. Potential disincentives to work as well, particularly for those who are lower skilled labour and might find that their marginal productivity of labour is sort of not valued highly enough. So all of those sort of things could be some of the downsides. On the upside, I think, if you look at, say, Amartya Sen's view of development and the idea that freedom is a really important aspect that contributes to economic development, well then universal basic income supports that, in that it creates conditions where people don't need to be worried so much about their job, and that they have that freedom to be able to leave their job and seek better employment for themselves, particularly if they're at the hands of, say, an abusive employer or something like this. And oftentimes, those who are at the lower income spectrum, find themselves in such conditions, but would often struggle to leave such conditions because of concerns about wage and things like that. So, universal basic income, I think, can help support people in those sorts of situations to be able to increase their freedoms. Yeah.
So, Andrew Yang, previous presidential candidate, had proposed $1,000 per month universal basic income policy that he wanted to implement once he, or if he were to become president.
Mm-hmm.
Would you think that policy would work in the culture of the United States in that setting?
It's hard to say. I mean, I guess if you know one looks at the American dream, or whatever, and the values that are behind that, and it's, you know, sort of reward for effort, then you know probably not. You know, I think it represents a fairly large and fundamental shift in the value systems, you know, of a country like the US, which very much values, you know, markets and capitalist structures. I think, you know, when you look at Finland, for example, with the introduction of their experiments with UBIs, it would be far less dramatic in terms of challenging social norms because they've got a much more sort of socialist outlook anyway. So, yeah, the proposal by Andrew Young is probably would probably be challenging in the context of the US, for example.
Wouldn't it be beneficial for like, since in the US there are a lot of, well, at least we see a lot of the homeless, the minimum wage workers who are all struggling to, you know, keep their lives afloat, especially, let's say, single mothers who have children to support for and 2 or maybe even 3 jobs in extreme cases. So obviously $1,000 a month will go a long way to help these families, but do you think it's overall worth it for an expenditure?
Do I think it's worth it? I think the jury's out on that. I think that there's not enough empirical evidence, you know, to sort of support that. I know that the World Bank, you know, have looked at a number of different scenarios, and you know, every country would you know sort of require their own implementation of universal basic income. You know, there's not one model that's going to fit every different scenario. I think, you know, one of the challenges with something like the US is that it's obviously a very wealthy country overall, but that doesn't mean that there's not significant inequality that you know exists within that country as well. And so the challenge would be that, you know, if you were to apply a truly universal basic income, well then, you know, the millionaires and billionaires in society, they don't require such funds to be given to them. It is, as you say, it's the working poor that would be most in need. And so of course they're likely to receive an uplift. But there's going to be a whole lot of government expenditure that would potentially be wasted on those who genuinely don't require it. You know, and I think, you know, when you look at the US, for example, you know, there's a very large entrepreneurial class that exists there. And so there would be that challenge of, you know, how do you stop the leakage at that top end of town, which may not exist in other sort of slightly more equal societies, perhaps.
But what about like the truck drivers losing their jobs by automation?
Well, I don't know. I don't know that universal basic income stops that. You know, I don't know that it stops people from losing their jobs. It simply provides a support, and so I said, like it provides an extra freedom to people who might be in that sort of situation to not be so dependent upon the wage that they receive from their employer, so that in the event of them losing their job, they've got a fallback position and they're not left destitute as a result. And so in that sense, yes, a UBI would be helpful. Now, the amount of money that would need to be given over, whether it's $1,000, whether it's $500, whether it's $2,000, you know, that number would very much depend upon the circumstances of the country, and whether $1,000 is appropriate for the US, I'm not in a position to say.
But then realistically, the universal basic income would not really be successful if it were implemented, because let's take Andrew Young's case. If you give $1,000 universally to everyone in the US, there's still going to be a huge gap between the rich and the poor, and $1,000 may still not be effective enough to make a difference for the people who are actually living in complete poverty in the US.
Well, that's the point. It reduces. It's actually, as in Andrew Young's case, it solves poverty.
But also, it depends on the country.
It solves. I mean,
Like,
it helps to alleviate, perhaps, but it doesn't solve.
But like, a huge problem is that, like, although like the thing with the truck driver is one of the most common jobs, like more than 5-6 states.
They get paid minimum wage, right? I think so.
Yeah,
it's
What is the minimum?
it's a low skilled job. So it's like if you're gonna, it's like money has to be funneled down from the top to the bottom, and that's not. There's no debate to whether it should be. Because like
there is. I mean, again, you know, the notion of trickle down economics was very popular under Reagan and Thatcher, and it was subsequently sort of alternatives were looked at, you know, because of the the inequalities that develop under that. I mean, I think, you know, it certainly hasn't been shown that when the rich get richer, they necessarily utilise that increase in wealth proportionately to, you know, further employ those that are poor or, you know, non-entrepreneurial. You know, so in terms of creating balance in society, you know, trickle-down economics, you know, hasn't been shown to be particularly good for that. So, you know, I don't think you can make the claim that it's unarguable that, you know, it must flow from the top down, because that is a way that society will structure itself, but it's not necessarily the way and the only way. Yeah.
Yeah, but the point is that, like, it's not just economically, it's like, if people on the bottom doesn't get their money, and there's like, and all of history has taught us that if they don't get their money, it's like, there will be like chaos, and like, people tend to lose control of.
Well, I guess, you know, this is one of the interesting things, you know, when you look at inequality, you know, around the world, for example, is, again, there's no one universal standard for what is best for society. You know, you look at, again, somewhere like the United States, which is tremendously wealthy as a country, but it's also tremendously unequal, right? But there is also countries that are obviously tremendously equal, that are tremendously poor, and there are countries in between. You know, a number of the Nordic countries, a number of the European countries have got relatively low inequality, but are still tremendously wealthy. And you've got, you know, countries that are incredibly poor that have also got tremendous levels of disparity. So again, there's no agreement on what constitutes the right balance. I mean, you know, at either extreme, you've got purely communist countries and you've got purely capitalist countries, of which really there aren't any countries that are absolutely organised along those lines. Sort of almost everyone operates somewhere on that spectrum, and what the ideal is absolutely up for debate, and no one has got that.
Wouldn't like a trickle-up economy suggest, like in Reagan's, it suggests that everyone can be trained for a job. Or at least that's the assumption, that everyone can be trained for a job, no matter how low skilled you are.
Oh, sure. I think, you know, but no, I don't. It suggests that no, I don't think it actually suggests that everyone can make a contribution at all. I think that you know, economics recognises that not everybody will be able to make a contribution. There will be those who are excluded from society in some way, shape, or form, and whether that be due to your age, whether that be, you know, like
Intellectual ability.
whether it be, you know, for sure. I mean, you know, there are people who have got disabilities, for example, whether that be physical or mental disabilities, who simply, you know, will not be able to find a place in the workforce. You'll have people who are simply too young. I mean, you know, I do not want to send my 11-year-old son out to work. You know, I mean, obviously during the Industrial Revolution that was very common, and in some countries it remains very common. That is not a society, however, that I would want to live in, and so supports need to be in place to account for the fact that there are those members of society who are unable to look after themselves.
Would you say
in an economic sense? And likewise with the elderly, you know, I don't want to be working until I'm 80, 90 years old. You know, I'd prefer that I didn't. And if by chance I haven't been able to provide, you know, or put enough aside so that when I get to my end of life stage, I've still got enough to survive, I would hope that there's going to be some form of support available. You know, and I think that that's part of the social contract that exists with things like taxes, for example. You know, when you pay your taxes, the government is there to serve the people, and that is not just in the immediate now, that is also in the future as well.
Would you say that universal basic income would be good enough of a support for, let's say, either those with disabilities or retired folks?
Well, again, I mean, that's difficult to say because it's a question that has to exist when comparing it to current supports that are available within that country. You know, so if you've got a country that already has, say, universal healthcare, and already has a pension scheme in place, and already has free schooling, and already has, you know, subsidies for, you know, meals, you know, for those that can't afford to buy them themselves. But then in a society like that, maybe universal basic income actually represents a regression. you know, and if you're looking at a country that doesn't have any of those supports, and you take a number of, say, the developing African countries as an example, where traditional supports are very poor, then maybe universal basic income may in fact serve to assist society. But then you've still got the issue of funding, and you know, where does it come from? And so you've got, you know, the opportunity costs that come with providing that, because typically one of the challenges with developing countries is very, very poor tax systems as well. You know, so not only do people have low incomes, whatever income they do have, you know, the government will struggle to capture some of that for themselves as well. So I think that, yeah, you can't answer that question in a standalone fashion. You've got to consider the factors that are already in place.
But let's say in the current economic situation in China, do you think that the universal basic income was applied, it would benefit the society, or what do you think? Just in China.
So again, the challenge with somewhere like China is you've got significant sort of inequality that exists as well. You know, in the context of a city like Shanghai, would it be of assistance? It's quite debatable.
Yeah.
You know, Shanghai, in a China context, is a very wealthy city. You know, and people that have got Shanghai Hukou tend to be, you know, quite well off, and there's good social supports available. Again, things like education and healthcare are well provided for citizens or residents of Shanghai. If I think about my wife's village, however, in Shandong province, would a universal basic income be of assistance there? Quite possibly so. You know, particularly, you know, they've got, you know, a lot of their income is dependent upon the quality of the harvest for that year, and through, I guess now decades of abuse of the land that they use, its productivity is declining, and so it's becoming harder and harder to sustain, you know, good level harvests. And so, in that context, for those people, would a universal basic income be of help? Quite possibly so.
But like even,
But again, without actually running, you know, a formal analysis, it'd be hard to say.
but even those like cities, right? Let's say U.S.
Mm-hmm.
You have this middle class,
Mhm.
which are suffering. Let's say, okay, so like even with someone in this middle class who went to college, right?
Mhm.
But the problem is that these colleges, they corrupt their students because like they're forcing them to take a school loan that will like burden them for life. So the problem is that like these middle income citizens, they go to college, even if they go to college and have an education,
Mhm.
they take on school and a school loan and a mortgage,
Mhm.
and when they end up a job, they still live paycheck to paycheck,
Mhm.
right? So
Mhm.
the problem is that they can't afford. Not only do you have to pay back these massive bills and these loans, they can't even afford the unexpected like medical bill.
Mhm.
And with the current system, like especially in America, there seems to be a crisis. And how do you solve that? If you're saying that the UBI does not work, then how do you?
I didn't say that
Yeah,
it
but-
does or it doesn't. I said that it's a
there's more
complex scenario.
there's more disadvantages than advantages.
I didn't say that either. I said that there
I
are
think, but-
disadvantages that are in place, and it's easier to name those disadvantages. I also said that for those who are in certain segments of society, UBI could be very beneficial, but it would depend upon looking
Then
at
how do you solve
supports.
this crisis?
Well, yeah. So I mean, that's
Because
an issue of the sort of economic structure of somewhere like the US, which believes in the power of the markets, for example. And so when you say that someone is forced to take out a loan, is it forced, or or is it a choice that they are making?
Yeah,
Because they believe that through their further education, through taking college education, they will be able to earn more over their lifetime than if they do not. And so long as they can earn enough to justify the cost of the loan, then they're still left in a better off position. And so, you know, it's you can hardly say that it's forced. No one is saying you must
Yeah,
go and do this.
I was exaggerating because like so much people take it.
so many people.
So it's, yeah, right. So then is that then simply an issue of decision making on behalf of the individual, you know? And
Yeah, but like it's
can you make the argument that the people are making rational choices, you know, or is it an irrational choice to go to college? I
But-
think that studies would show that college education, for the most part, does add significantly to one's expected earnings over their lifetime. And so as a result, it would be quite a proper choice to do that. And is that the same for everybody? No. There's always going to be those that don't succeed. But in the whole, on the average, university
But that's
generally
but
shows
good.
that
Is that a good universities, or like including all universities? Because I'm not talking about like just the good ones in the U.S., which are
Mhm.
also insanely expensive.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm saying like let's say the mediocre state university, or not even state, the private university, but are attended by let's say mediocre students. Okay, not the top of.
Yeah,
their
so I
class.
mean, so again, I mean, you're looking at, I guess, sort of a couple of different things there. People have got choices as to where they're going to go for university. People have got choices about how hard they're willing to work to take advantage of the opportunities that are afforded through that education. The mere fact of attending university in and of itself isn't enough, to be, successful with that education. You need to be applying yourself, obviously. And, the mere fact that you have attended a school, a good school, will open, potentially open some doors, socially. But if you fail all of your courses and you don't graduate from one of those good schools, then it means nothing either. So, there's a level of effort and a level of application that's required on behalf of the individual there as well. But again, I would say that studies would show that for the vast majority, university education has shown itself to be a
Yeah, but is
good
that
thing.
proportional to the amount of like burden and money you're spending? Like,
Well, yeah. I mean, over the course of their lifetime, the amount of income that is earned is of a significant, enough magnitude to cover the cost of the education and to, still leave people better off than if they did not take such education. And
So people who take higher education, such as university, would be considered more or less skilled. Right?
yes,
So how do you think UBI would affect these people? Would they help them in, let's say, student loans, or do you think it's
well,
unnecessary?
yeah. I mean, again, I think it comes down to that notion of freedom to not be so dependent upon your job, and so it allows someone to maybe spend some time actually trying out, different employers and different career paths before settling on that which suits them the best. And I think, again, that's where the UBI is perhaps most beneficial, is that it opens up that freedom to not be so reliant on any one individual employer for your livelihood.
But that also,
And that's really, so again, as I said before, the challenge is then, for someone who is established in their career, you'll be throwing good money after sort of nothing, because the difference between, say, $1,000 a month and the $10,000 a month income that person is earning, if they're a high school worker, is not going to be, no one's going to want to go from, say, $10,000 a month down to $1,000 a month, But if you're just starting out in life and your income a month is only sort of $2,000 a month, well, then the adjustment to be made is not so significant, and people may be willing to experiment with that a little bit more.
do you think that people are, say if you're trying out and you don't think anything fits, do you think people are likely to stick and just live with whatever universal basic income they get, or do you think they will strive for, let's say, higher income and better quality of life?
Yeah, I think that's one of the common concerns that's raised about a universal basic income, and it's why, for example, many unemployment benefits, when they're offered by governments around the world, are means tested, for example, to make sure that you're not receiving it when you've got capacities to survive, etc. And I think that in Australia, for example, there is a very strong term, a dole bludger, for someone who simply accepts government welfare or whatever and really wants to do nothing for it and is content to live, on that income. I would say that if someone is genuinely wanting to do that, they're going to have a very poor life. And that usually people who are stuck in that environment for the longer term have often got other social issues going on in their life beyond just a lack of desire to work. You know, there's something that has contributed to that along the way. And most people, I don't think, would want that as their as their lifestyle, because it's not a very good one.
Yeah, but then
And so that's what I said, like the quantum of money that is offered as a universal basic income has to weigh those issues.
no, so but then what you just discussed contributes to the factor of how the universal basic income can be quite negative, because there's always a large proportion of the people receiving the money in whatever country we're talking about who will just collect the money and not use it in a more beneficial way towards society or to help themselves, because there's always the drug addicts or the lazy immigrants, or for example, in Europe, there are the immigrants coming from Syria or poor Arabic states or still in civil war, like in state of civil war. They go to countries such as Spain or France. I think in Greece there are some immigrants as well. They go in there and then they collect
Benefits.
benefits. Yeah, that benefits from the government that the working population in the country pay for with their taxes. Taxes have, in Europe, I know in France at least, have gone up quite significantly in the past few years. But they're also providing for the refugees and the people coming in who aren't really contributing to the economy. So
Yeah, so I think what you'd find with that is that the actual proportion of government spend on, say, no, not on immigrants, on say refugees, for example, is actually very small as a proportion of the government budget. I would say that when you look into studies on migration, they almost always point to migration being a positive thing for societies in terms of improving wealth, for that particular country. So to label people as sort of negative simply because they are an immigrant is problematic at the least.
I know what you're saying, but I'm not labeling immigrants as problematic. But if
Well,
you
I
look,
mean,
let's start-
in a sense, you just laid out a complaint that the
I did.
French government, for example, have had to raise taxes because
of but
migration
if you
spending.
look- if you
And
look-
again, I would dispute that. I think that
I know,
there are significant benefits
it is
to
definitely
most migrant populations contribute actually very positively to the societies that they head towards.
I mean, it is definitely disputable, but if you look at it with the increased immigration from refugees, I'm not saying pauper, I'm saying jumping across illegal immigration.
Well, again,
Because there's a lot of illegal. Because
Well, again, it's debatable whether there is such a thing. I mean, at least in terms of, say, the refugee concerns. I mean, the idea of being an illegal refugee, the very definition is that you are unable to sustain your own life in your own
exactly.
sort of birthplace.
But I'm sorry, I didn't make it clear before. But when I meant immigrants, I didn't mean legal immigrants. I meant illegal immigrants, because everyone wants legal immigrants. Migration is mostly positive to any country, but illegal immigrants who come in, because the populations in the people in Europe still pay for their benefits, for their well-being.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm saying illegal immigrants are problematic in this current state because of just of what they're doing. The crime rates increase. It's true. If you look at statistics, illegal immigration has increased crime rates in European countries. It is true. It is true.
There's a causation. And,
I think it's
No,
a
back-
causation. I think it's a causation. I think it's a causation.
Yeah, I mean, look,
It's okay.
there is no doubt that your view is a common one. However, I would sort of suggest that whilst it is the case that certain people take a while to integrate into
or
new
certain
societies
people don't
because-
even integrate to society.
because of issues like the language and because they are separated from their own communities. Over the longer term, again, for the most part, they are a positive influence on the society that they end up in.
The legal ones?
Not the legal ones. The legal ones, of course.
I
I agree with the legal ones.
But even, I mean, this notion of sort of illegal sort of immigration, you know, what is prompting that? Why are people leaving and going to that new society?
Obviously,
it
but-
is
well,
because
doesn't matter.
they believe that they
That-
can make a better life for
Yes,
themselves
but-
in that environment.
But
And in order to do that, they must be making a contribution. And
Yeah, but
so
they're not making a contribution, though.
Well, certain people may not, but that's again, it's hard to make that as a blanket statement.
Yes.
No, but like, okay, so like, do you think illegal immigrants have the right if a UBI was proposed in a country?
Well, no, okay, so I think that's where it's again the operation of a UBI would be important. I would suggest that a universal basic income is something that would be provided to the citizens of that country. So even if you are a legal migrant or who is, say, there as a permanent resident, you know, you may not get access to such a payment because you haven't yet taken that
Registered.
step of,
Yeah.
of becoming a full-blown citizen of that particular country. So, you know, regardless of whether you are legal or illegal, you know, a government may still choose to exclude you, you know, from such a payment because it may be for their own citizens only. And again, that would be a question that the government would need to look at. I guess, you know, one of the things with someone like what you term to be an illegal immigrant is that they often don't have things like tax file numbers or, you know, tax identification numbers. So there would be no way for the government to even necessarily know how to give such funds to them because they're not going to have a bank account. They're not
But they
going
should
to.
anyways.
Sorry.
But they shouldn't.
Again, this would be a value judgment for the country concerned. I
You
mean,
could, you could make a value judgment, sir. It's okay.
this would be a value judgment for the country concerned.
Oh,
Okay,
I mean,
we're running
I
out of
I
time
think-
here,
No, you
so-
have to do it longer because like
Huh?
you might cut the reception.
No, I'm
there's
not
nothing
gonna
to cut. We're not.
And
we're
now
not
I'm gonna
cussing.
have to cut.
It's okay. Just don't cut the start, because that was okay.
I'm not gonna cut until now, and then I'm gonna cut until I say
And
we're
then we
running
say
out of time.
we're-
Okay, so we're running out of time here, so we'll have one final big question, I guess. Do you think that universal basic income is the best way to combat, let's say, automation? And would you say that automation is a consistent problem that will that it can only be solved with social support, or do you think something else will pop up to save those jobs?
Okay, so do I think that it's the best and only way to solve the issue of automation? No, I don't. I don't think it will really do much in that regard at all. I think, you know, society has always shifted, you know, and society has always essentially found ways to sort of exclude large proportions of the population, you know, and force them into new areas. You know, the Industrial Revolution was probably the largest example of that, where, you know, a whole lot of people, a whole lot of, you know, society used to be organised around crafts, you know, and people would belong to craft guilds, and they were, you know, sort of highly specialised, you know, labour in whatever task they did in relation to the item that was being produced. And clearly now that's not the case. So, in terms of automation, it's a fairly natural progression of the technologies that we've created for ourselves, you know, and that exists not only in what you might call sort of low-skilled jobs, it's also existing, you know, in what you consider very high-skilled jobs, you know, with things like machine learning and AI, for example. You know, there's questions about whether lawyers, for example, are going to be required in the near future because a machine will basically be able to trawl through all the cases and find the relevant precedents much quicker than a lawyer will be able to do. And likewise, with appropriate programming, is likely to make a more rational decision than a judge. And so, you know, obviously, you know, if you're a lawyer, you're a very highly trained individual. You've got a lot of knowledge, but they are not, you know, immune to the effects of automation either. So I don't think the UBI is going to be there. I think what will happen is new jobs, new industries that support that automation and that you know, enhance that automation will develop, and it'll be incumbent upon society to, you know, to find ways to get people into those industries. But there's no doubt that society, there will be a shift that will take place. There'll be a structural change in society, and society has always managed to find a way to adapt itself to that.
What if like these people are too dumb to move into the industry?
Well, I mean, look, I would probably put myself in that category. I mean, there's no way I'm going to go away and learn coding. I'm not going to go and learn, how to become an engineer overnight or anything like this. It's not within my skill set. Okay.
No, but
So no, I mean, but I get what you're saying. That you're sort of talking about this notion of innate intelligence, etc., and the inability then for some people to grasp, the opportunities that might be afforded in these new industries for them. And clearly that would be a worry for society. And that then becomes a challenge for society's education systems to adjust to and to adapt to.
they teach them how to.
Yeah.
All right, that's all we have time for today, and thank you, Mr. Evans,
Thank you for your
joining
time,
us.
sir. Thank
Joining
you.
us.
You're welcome, guys. It was a
Thank you.
fun chat.
It was a very interesting chat.
Yes.
Yes.
We'll see you next time.
I look forward to seeing the editing hatchet job that goes on
Yes.
there. Whatever,
If-
to push my words into whatever into whatever Fox News
Maybe.
approach we want to have. Yeah.
All right,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you.